Hey, it's Webs here with day 3 of the Maw and Disorder mini-set card reveals. And today we got the final legendary for the set, which is a character that I completely forgot about, even though it makes a lot of sense of why he is going to be the last legendary. So let's begin with some of the Hunter cards. The first one being Motion Denied, which is a new secret for Hunter that reads, after your opponent plays 3 cards in a turn, deal 6 damage to the enemy hero, and then the upgraded version due to the hero card is going to do 9 damage instead of 6. This card is a double-edged sword. On one hand, it is really good for Questline Hunter, which is really nice for it to get additional support, even though it's a deck that does not need it. On the other hand, it does make Beast Stalker Tavish a little less consistent on getting you some AoE. But it being able to actually do 9 damage with the improved version is something that can't be looked too little on, because that is a lot of damage and could actually just win out the game really quickly there. It isn't a real big payoff, which we haven't actually seen any big payoffs for any of the secret classes so far, which is kind of weird to say. But I do think this will probably see some play in Secret Hunter and maybe in some other decks. But it is going to be a little bit more frustrating to not generate a explosive trap when you really need it off of Davish. But that is what you get for having an additional secret in this set. The next card that got revealed is Shade Hound, which is a 5-cost Hunter minion with 6 attack, 5 HP. It has the beast tag. Whenever this attacks, give your other beast +2/+2. Infuse 3 beasts, gain rush. And this is the infused version. It looks like we're going to see a little bit more infused synergy with individual types of minions, and I wouldn't be shocked to see something like maybe, I don't know, mech for mage or something else that is very common in that class right now in the future. I do think this will probably see a little bit of play in a aggro-based hunter deck, or even in a deck that you just want to buff up your board. Maybe a token-based Hunter deck will be a little bit better. It has a lot of possibilities because Hunter does have a lot of ways to actually spawn a bunch of beasts to easily infuse this and then get the buffs. This could easily guarantee you lethal if they have a big minion on board, and then you have a bunch of little beasts that can actually just go into your opponent's face that gain +2/+2 whenever you do play this down with Rush. And now for the character that I completely forgot about, which shouldn't have really shocked me as much as it did, Defense Attorney Nathanos, which is a 6-cost legendary minion for Hunter with 5 attack, 4 HP. Battlecry, discover a friendly Death Rattle minion that has died this game, trigger and gain its Death Rattle. This can actually be comboed pretty well with Bran if you know what you want to actually get a bunch of Death Rattles for. In theory, you could run this in a Al style of Hunter deck, which I've actually played around with a few times before, though I do think the most common use of this is going to be used with Mountain Bear or the Hydra, though I do think the Mountain Bear is probably going to be the better choice if you are going to run it in that type of deck. I do really want to try out a Death Rattle Hunter deck now that we have seen this card, especially given the fact that Owl Hunter has always been a soft spot for me. And I figure between this, the Monstrous Parrots, and Bran's Bronzebeard, you should be able to get enough damage where you're going to be able to kill your opponent in 1 turn or even in 2 turns, depending on how many minions they have on board. I think him being 6 cost does open a lot of possibilities, and he doesn't have a bad stat line for a 6-cost minion that has a Death Rattle, especially because you do want to trigger that Death Rattle as quickly as humanly possible. And now for some Paladin cards. The first one being Class Action Lawyer, which is a 2-cost Paladin minion with 2 attack, 3 HP. Battlecry, if your deck has no neutral cards, set a minion's stats to 1/1. Just a little bit more extra removal and another equalizer for Paladin. This actually will make the matchup against Priest a little bit better, especially Naga Priest, where you can actually set a minion who is untargetable by spells and hero powers actually 1/1, which is really, really nice. Though it doesn't necessarily remove that minion from the board, it is just a nice additional removal tool. I do think Here, Paladin is one of those decks that might be a little bit better once the set comes out. However, I don't think this card is enough to push it into a tier 1 deck. The next card that got revealed for Paladin is Jury Duty, which is a 3-cost Paladin spell that summons 2 Silverhand Recruits. Give your Silverhand Recruits +1/+1. Another card for Dude Paladin, if that deck actually ever becomes a thing. This one's pretty decent on its own. It doesn't require too much setup and does actually just AoE buff all your other recruits that you have on the board. It isn't a 1-cost spell, so it doesn't actually trigger a quest line, which is something that you would want in a Dude Paladin deck. But because it is an AoE board buff, this could give you lethal in theory if you do have a huge board of Silverhand recruits. And it does give you 2 additional ones, which is pretty nice if you have additional space. But in theory, if you are going to be using it for just a board buff and not to summon the additional 2 recruits, then this card is basically a worse sermon. Sure, it's going to cost 1 less, but there are just other cards that currently exist in Paladin that are way better than doing something like this. There also is the War Horseman that gives them +2 attack and taunt, which I think would be strictly better than this, and that also costs 3. All right, for the final Paladin card, it is Order in the Court, which is a 2-cost spell for Paladin that reorders your deck from highest cost to lowest cost. Draw a card. This could be really interesting in a Dude Paladin deck or anything where you want to draw into a very high cost card relatively early. The reason why I say Dude Paladin might be kind of interesting for this is because you could, in theory, run Sire and then draw into the other 2 combo pieces and then have everything being a low cost card, thus allowing you to actually get the biggest Sires that you've ever seen. However, at the same time, I don't know how many different combos exist currently that Paladin has access to that would make a card like this really useful in a deck like that. There might be some way better options, and that does turn off your questline for quite a while if you do decide to use this in a Dude Paladin deck. I do think this could be really cool to use in combination with something like Cariel, which we have seen in the past with Druid when you can guarantee your hero card really early on in the game, especially one of the ones that are more high impactful. It could just win you the game outright. It should be an interesting card to play around with because, again, if you're using it with Cariel, you could also then make your second highest cost Smite, and then you could just keep buffing up the Smite while also using a bunch of removal tools in your hand and deck to get rid of whatever your opponent actually puts down. It's going to be a weird one to actually try to figure out where it places, but there's a bunch of different possibilities. Hell, even Frontline could be used with this card. It's going to be a cool card either way. I don't know if it's going to be that good, but it might make for some frustrating plays. At least it isn't going to be as frustrating as some of the other cards revealed, including this next one, which is Call to the Stand, which is a 1-cost warrior spell that your opponent summons a random minion from their hand. More hand disruption in this mini set. That seems to be the reoccurring theme, and the classes that didn't get any type of hand disruption or deck disruption seem to be at a much lower ranking right now, I would say, in my opinion, than the classes that have gotten some of this support. It's really weird to me that not every single class got something like this, especially some of the more control style classes, such as Paladin, for example. Sure, reordering your deck could, in theory, be really strong, but a card like this, I much rather play in a control style deck. Sure, you might make them drop down a 10-10 on like turn 1 or something, but if you do have some way to actually answer the 10-10 instantly, such as a Shield Slam plus a Frozen Bulker or something else, you are just going to steal away their win condition, and this is going to be a little bit frustrating to play against. We also do know that cards like Dirty Rat do see a lot of play in Wild already, so I can't see a world where Sire is one of the biggest problems currently in the metagame, that a card like this doesn't see some play if Control Warrior does pop up again. The next warrior card revealed is Maw Sworn Bailiff, which is a 5-cost minion with 4 attack, 4 HP. It has Taunt, Battlecry if you have 4 or more armor, gain +4/+4. I don't think this card is going to see much play. I do think we are about to hit critical mass though on good taunt cards, so maybe a taunt warrior might pop up. However, as it currently stands, sure it's a 8/8 for 5 mana, but I don't know if that's enough nowadays to actually see too much play. I do want to try out taunt warrior just because, again, if we have actually hit critical mass for that deck, this probably is a pretty good card in it, especially because you can line up the previous turn with one of the Obsidian Lava Gorgers, where you gain armor according to whatever card that you dredge up from the bottom of your deck, thus allowing you to most of the time actually have 4 or more armor. Could be a really cool idea to play around with. I don't think a lot of people are expecting people to try something like that out, but it could be always a deck that is a sleeper hit. And finally, for the last warrior card revealed, Weapons Expert, which is a 3-cost minion for warrior with 3 attack, 2 HP. Battle cry: if you have a weapon equipped, give it +1/+1, otherwise draw a weapon. Support for Remoria, which is great. I've been wanting to use Remoria for quite a while now. However, I don't think this is enough to push Remoria to being a meta-relevant card. I think the one thing that would help Remoria is maybe having text on it saying this card always counts as a weapon, so you can also buff it up in your hand or deck with all the other weapon synergy buffs that we do see in the current standard Hearthstone. Though I don't think they're going to place a tag like that on Remoria just because of the fact that it would take up too much room, but it's cool to see additional support for something like that. You could also use this in combination with a bunch of the other really good weapons that currently exist in Hearthstone, such as the Infused Axe for a more aggro warrior, or maybe even the Outrider Axe for additional card draws and being able to remove additional minions from the board. There's just a lot of different possibilities you could do with this card, but Remoria is the first one I can think of off the top of my head. Either way, it's a really cool way to end out the warrior support, even though I don't think all of the warrior cards will probably see much play, and it doesn't really help warrior out too much when it comes to their win percentages, but it could be really interesting from a deck building perspective. And like always, let me know down below which ones you're looking most forward to actually playing with. I think Order in the Court is probably my favorite card in this entire set, just because it isn't too anti-other player, but it also does allow you to enable some really wacky combos in theory, depending on how you actually build your deck. And if you enjoyed the video, please like, comment, and subscribe. Until next time, bye-bye.